Welcome to the podcast that explores mysterious disappearances, bizarre worldly occurrences, strange phenomenon, and basically everything that's weird. Welcome to the podcast. Everything that's weird. We're your hosts, Brandon and Anthony, and tonight we're gonna trip nuts. Not really. We're gonna talk about it. We're gonna talk about it. We're gonna talk about MK Ultra and the government experiment with LSD and mind control. And it's important to say that it's not just LSD.
Right.
They were looking at barbiturates and morphine, all kinds of stuff. And it's important to note
brainwashing.
Up until the 90s, they were still trying to figure out a gay bomb, which I love the idea of gay bomb. Gay bomb, where you drop it and everybody sucks each other off. That, at my core, makes me laugh.
I would have thought it would have been targeting gays.
No, so trying to make everybody gay.
Yeah.
I love that idea. That makes me laugh inside.
A lot more pronouns these days.
Right? Okay, so we're going all the way back to the end of World War II, and the Nazis were part of their research. Part of the things that we stole from the Nazis and the Soviets stole from the Nazis: rocketry, jet propulsion, all these technologies. But one of the things they were working on was mind control. And there's a really good show on History Channel called The Nazis and Their Drug Abuse. And it talks about how, Hitler, he was like hopped up on crystal meth.
Yeah, the whole German army was.
They were big on crystal meth.
They just called it ration kit.
Right, so at the time they called it amphetamines.
Yeah.
And it's important to know that, we were giving our soldiers amphetamines at that time, too. Because at the time, there wasn't a lot of long-term studies,
Right.
But kind of the break comes after World War II.
Only they had known they'd be sucking dick.
Yeah, right.
Why you tell me one of the side effects was sucking dick?
I always think of Clerks, so he's like, try not to suck any dick on your way through the parking lot. So LSD, it's invented before we're in World War II, right? So actually it's invented, I guess, before the Nazis invade Poland, which starts World War II. So it's invented in 1938, but it doesn't become useful or studied until a couple years later. So if you don't know, it's called lysergic acid dithylamide. Right?
Yeah, nice.
Did I hit it? Did I hit it? Okay. Acid for short. Right. So when it was invented, they had mushrooms. They were trying to synthesize mushrooms, which they did.
Yeah. Do you remember that scientist's name? The inventor? Can we get Mario to check that?
Yes. We get Mario to check that.
There's a funny story about that. He was working with it and he was and he didn't realize he had dosed himself, and he was on his way home and he was riding his bicycle, and he said the whole everything got crazy on him,
Albert Hoffman.
Everything was a painting, an oil painting and stuff.
So what's his name?
Albert Hoffman.
Okay.
Yeah. There was a story. There is a story about him riding home on his bicycle one day and tripping his nuts off because he didn't realize he had dosed himself.
So we always say this with like topics like this, but you seriously could do a whole podcast on MK Ultra.
Well, yeah,
And
sure. Spanned a long time.
We can't even, like, all we're going to do is kind of tell you the overview, tell you some facts. We're giving you Cliff Note version.
Yeah, and I got
this thing is
the
so
one story
deep.
that like exposed the whole thing.
Right. This thing it's really deep.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what makes it crazy is that our government full on just participated in this.
Yeah.
So it starts off
Lots of illegal shit, but this was like the CIA was like part of the army back then, right?
Absolutely. So there's the OSS until the end of World War II, and then the CIA is created.
Right.
And they take over where the OSS left off.
Mm-hmm.
So their mission statement is to control intelligence. Mm-hmm. And that's very like broad, right? That's really broad.
Yeah.
And if you think about where the CIA is involved throughout history, it's always in like revolutions, overthrows, coups. Like, it's always in these crazy, bizarre. Like, there's a book called Confessions of an Economic Hitman, where at one point we stop overthrowing regimes and we start ruining economies. Because we're like, you know, you overthrow a regime, and what you do is you basically bring up another person that believes it, right? So we're like, okay, but if you ruin the economy,
all can use your overthrow as their fuel.
Absolutely, it's a stepping, right? It's a soapbox. Like, see what they did. Yep. But then you ruin their economy, and it makes them look inept, right?
And their own people turn them.
And so we started this whole other thing in like the 70s. But before then, we had drugs, and we're like, hey, let's see what happens. Let's see what happens, man. Let's just try to dose some people and see what's up. So one thing they do is they dose an entire town in France. And this is crazy because, like, all of a sudden, these people are just like living their lives and they're tripping balls. So you and I have a friend, and we've actually talked about him before. He's a teacher, and somebody put acid in his coffee. Mm-hmm. And he wasn't really a partier. Like, he did party, like he would drink a few beers here and there, but he wasn't like a partier. And I remember he told me, Anthony, I felt like I was losing my mind. And
yeah, if you don't know it's coming, if you didn't do it to yourself, that's got to
right.
be.
It's got to be. Yeah. Even if you know that it's coming, LSD is no joke.
Yeah, if you've never done it or you're not knowing what to expect or anything like that. Yeah, we had there was a teacher and a couple students that got dosed at
where you went.
Yeah, and they the teacher, you know, he had no clue. He was walking around the school with like his sunglasses on, and he was the kind of, his sunglasses were those ones that wrap all the way around the side, kind of like a blocker on the side. He's like that kind of guy.
Oh man!
You know, they got a string on him so he doesn't lose them. And it was one of the other teacher who's pretty hip to everything. He saw him walking around like that, and he asked him what was going on, and he said, "I think something's going funny with my eyes." And he put two and two together, and he said, "You better go home. I'm going to get you a ride," you know, and he got like one of the secretaries to ride him home. But there was another kid that was like a band geek kid, never done anything in his life, and they gave it to him too. And he
flip out?
Oh, yeah.
Shit.
he went crazy in the classroom. He was like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm going insane. And it's like, man, that's wrong.
You got to be in a certain state of mind to take on something like that. Like mushrooms are a lot less toxic and won't hit. Okay, I won't say they won't hit you that hard, but they'll go away.
They're very much different.
They are very much different. They'll go away. LSD does not go away.
That's a ride you're taking for a while.
You are. Absolutely. So there's a bunch of like experiments.
So I've heard from the kids.
Right, from the kids. There's a bunch of experiments. One of them is it creates like a mass murderer, and his name is the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski. So his brother, they have a whole documentary about his brother. His brother ends up turning him in, right?
Yeah.
Because his brother came up with, he had written his brother a letter, and he used some of the same language that he used in a manifesto that he wrote to a newspaper. Mm-hmm. So part of the deal with the Unabomber was they couldn't find him because he used so much random shit. Mm-hmm. So he would go to Goodwill and buy an alarm clock, and then buy batteries at Walgreens, and then go to Kmart and buy a spring. And like,
right,
everything came, it was a mismatch. Like even when they prosecuted him, they were like, it was a nightmare because everything came from everywhere. What hung him was his brother. Is like, it's my brother. And he's like, I looked up to my brother. He's like, he was crazy smart. They're like, he was crazy smart. And he's like, he went to Harvard at 15. Yeah. So at 15, he's at Harvard. He gets like fast tracked, right? So like within like a year and a half, he's a junior. So he's a junior. He's picked as a subject. And they dose him with acid. They give him acid. Mm-hmm. And they're like, your friends don't like you. Everybody makes fun of you. You're not as smart as you think. And they grill him just like that for hours and hours. And he's like smart enough. He's like, why are you doing this? Like, why are you doing this? But he's altered. And it changes his fucking thinking. It really does. It messes him up.
Yeah.
He goes on to like hate. No, absolutely. He goes on to like hate technology because the way he sees it is that any kind of advancement in technology results in people either oppressing somebody else or destroying other people. Mm-hmm. So he becomes like a recluse and, kind of denounces technology, and at the same time becomes like this guy that makes bombs and kills people. Mm-hmm. So
this is what he
does. That's a guy
that's dead,
That's a guy that's super smart, right?
Yeah.
So if you take like
smart.
the average soldier, yeah, this has legs as far as like, if that's what you're set out to do, and you're trying to occupy people's brains, and you have this guy that's freak, right? Super smart, and you fucked him up, then yeah, this whole thing has legs. So they continue with these experiments, and then what happens?
Oh, with Dolstein?
Absolutely.
Yeah, John. There's a man named John Olstein that flew out a hotel window and hit the sidewalk. And when they went up to the room to investigate, there was another man in there. He was in the bathroom. He was like another, I believe he was another scientist. And he said he was asleep in the other room and he must have just thrown himself out the window. And after he goes, you know, his family, of course, they want to know what's going on. And they said, it looks like, you know, he was depressed and he threw himself out a window. Well, it always kind of sat fishy with him, you know. It didn't seem right to him, but it wasn't like it was unusual. Like, or his wife said that he was kind of like starting to get downtrodden. She didn't really know what he did for work. She knew he was a scientist, and she knew that he was traveling a lot and stuff like that. And she noticed that he's like started to become more and more like depressed about his work. So they didn't think too much of it, but at some point there was a article written about CIA working with mind control and LSD that caused a scientist to jump out a window. And the family found out about this article. And when they called up to find out what was going on, the next thing they know, the president of the United States is inviting them to the White House.
Right.
And they go to the White House and he offers them, he says, it's our fault that he died. We take responsibility for it. We'll give you $750,000 if you don't sue us.
What year is that?
That was in 53.
Mario, how much is $750,000 in 1953? Was it 53? Was it 53?
Yeah, 53.
Okay. But go ahead.
Anyway, so they give him the money and they go quiet and they don't say anything for it. In a few years, you know, quite a while passes, and through some other, I can't remember what detail it was that came up that got the family back involved, but it was some Freedom of Information Act request that opened a kind of can of worms into his death. And when they started looking into it, they went back to try it because they proved that he did in fact give. What happened was the CIA got together and they grabbed a bunch of their scientists because Frank Olson was working on biochemical warfare. And he was doing tests on people, illegal tests on an island called Plum Island. And it's like, it's a New York island, but it's really like below Connecticut. And it's still today, it's got biohazard research on it. You can't go, that's where it's there because it's not safe to be on the mainland, like the stuff that they're testing. Well, they were conducting experiments on people, and some of them were like Canadian and U.S. citizens that they thought might be spies. Not like that were convicted of spying, but they thought were spies. So they were conducting, and they were doing the same thing that you're talking about.
They were trying to find a truth serum.
Well, they were giving them acid. They were raping them. They were doing all kinds of stuff. Trying to do these mind fuck. Every one of them, they were doing different shit to see what effects they could get out of them. And Frank Olson was part of these experiments. So what the CIA did was they took a bunch of these scientists that were like a Frank Olson, but they were all from different places, and they took them to this retreat. And when they got to the retreat, the guy that was hosting the retreat gives them all a drink, but he laces it with LSD and doesn't tell them. So they all drink
That's
it.
so not fair.
And then he tells them after they drink it. Like, he tells them before they're tripping, but he tells them right after they drink it. And he says, I've dosed you all with LSD, blah, blah, blah. But you're in a safe place. And they're at this cabin in this retreat. And well, from what I understand, the purpose of it was to see if they gave them LSD, if any of these scientists that had all this insanely secretive knowledge, if they'd start spilling the beans if given the drug. You know, like if the enemy got their hands on them and gave them the drug, would they start yapping their gums? And so from all the scientists that were, because this came out in the Freedom of Information Act, there was a list of the scientists that were there. Mm-hmm. They were given the acid. And because of that information, that's where the family came in. They tried to sue the CIA for it, but the judge was like, no, I have to throw this out because you signed a piece of paper that said you wouldn't sue them over the death of your father.
So Mario,
but even the judge was like, wait a minute, but even at that, something's going on here. So
Mario, 750,000 to today's money,
8.7 million.
Yeah, not bad.
That's a pretty fair chunk of change for a rando suicide that, you know,
tax free.
Yeah, and so what happened was the family had, at some point, they had his, when their mom passed away in like the 90s, they had, or their dad dug up.
Yes, I heard this.
They could rebury him next to the mom, and they had somebody else do an autopsy on an independent autopsy on it. Now, he found out that he landed on his back, but he had like damage to his face,
right? Like he was beat up before.
Yeah, he was beat up and
thrown out,
and he had no glass, like no scratches or cuts from the glass. So it was almost like the window was broken, and then he was thrown out after they beat him up. You know what I mean? Beat him up, knocked him unconscious, broke the window out, and then threw him out is what it looked like. And that's what the coroner said. He said it looks like this was a murder, which that's what busted open the whole thing, and the CIA had to admit they like all the things had to be admitted. And so what part of what they found out is that they were conducting all these experiments. They were all illegal because the Geneva Convention was, I don't know, Mario could probably look it up, 1923, I think. So everything they were doing was completely illegal.
That makes sense. It's after World War I.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Because that's after getting gassed and all that stuff.
Okay,
so his death really kind of opened it up to the public to know that yes, this did in fact happen. And because the family, when they realized they couldn't sue, they went straight to the reporters.
Right, they opened it up.
Yeah.
So let's where we're at is that the government, and what we even talked before. I'm not going to bury. I don't want to bury the lead, but we said what it obviously happened. What we're going to have to say at the end of this is what percentage of this happened.
Yeah, right.
Because this is like an obvious faux pas from our government. Miscalculation is to say the least. Oops, we should have done that. But where we're at is that in an effort to find some kind of mind control, some kind of way that the government could control countries, they were experimenting with different kinds of drugs, and in that they tested it on a bunch of different subjects. And that whole thing is called MK Ultra. Mm-hmm. And we'll have to talk about some facts to make what we just said make sense, because there's a lot of other things you should know before we go forward with this. But that's basically that the government came up with a way that they were thinking would control countries as some kind of mind control, and they extracted this idea from the Nazis in World War II, and they were implementing them on different kinds of people, and ultimately it does backfire. But
yeah,
like
and
what
it's got
percentage
branches like in everywhere. I mean, because it kind of like tentacled out into all the electroshock and hypnosis and sensory deprivation, torture, sexual abuse, all that stuff comes from this MK Ultra, basically. They're the ones that were like really developing all these techniques that get branched out into other, you hear the black site and they're torturing people, and it's like a lot of that probably, from what I understand, came from these projects.
All right, well, let's talk about some facts. Okay, so there's a lot to dive into.
Mm-hmm.
One of the main things is that they don't just take like 10 people and do some experiments. They go all out. They're like, let's just dose a town and see what happens.
Right.
And they do. They do a town in France. So this is disputed.
I saw a number for it. Like they spent on the total, like they spent like in today's inflation, it's like $90 million doing this mind control and all that stuff.
So it's called Ergo. It's like bread that
ergot. Yeah.
Ergot. Okay. So it's bread that you trip on.
It's the mold. It's a mold that grows on the bread.
Okay. So they blamed it on that.
Yeah, because it was responsible for some, like there was like
which is very easy, right?
Yeah, because it happened in the past. That like there had been mass hysteria, and it was because of people eating that bread mold that everybody was tripping and they went crazy, and so there's like documented cases of it happening. So it was one of those things that they just grabbed it and said it was this.
So, like, alcohol goes back to, and this is just a Joe Rogan. I don't know if this is true or not. Monkeys picking up rotten oranges and stuff, rotten fruit basically that fermented itself, and then they get drunk on it, and then they look out for like fallen fruit, and that's kind of how the development of alcohol happens, because it's fairly simple. You need like sugar and water and time, right? It's some yeast, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the development of these chemicals is fairly, they see right away that there are these chemicals that make you act a certain way. They're trying to implement them. They come up with LSD. And when they come up with LSD, it's like, it's the real deal. Like, right away, people think it's a wonder drug. And it can handle trauma. And people that have, these, big, like, psycho events can be cured from it. And that you can change the way people think by giving it to them. And I don't know. I'm not saying anything against that, because I mean, there is before and after if you do acid. Right now, right this second, there are hundreds of cultures out there that deal with ayahuasca. There's one in Tibet where the bees eat a certain pollen that gives off like a psychedelic effect, and then they make honey, and they have these crazy hives, and these guys in the Himalayas climb these crazy cliffs and get these honeycombs, and people trip off of it, and it's supposed to have healing properties and whatever. And right now in Oregon, Washington, and California, they have decriminalized mushrooms to where you can, it's called microdosing.
Yeah.
And it is said to like help you with depression and, you know, be like some kind of like psychotherapy.
Yeah.
But not this shit. They're giving people fucking straight up acid.
Yeah.
That is like, you know, a full laboratory dose. Not even watered down.
They're not hoping you get better.
No. This is like just to like pick people out.
Well,
and
did you know that like it was a part of the freedom of information part where they had to disclose stuff, because a lot of this stuff went to congressional hearings and all this stuff. And there was at one point the CIA had considered purchasing 10 kilograms of LSD, which is enough for 100 million doses.
Damn.
The proposed purchase was aimed to, in quotes, to stop other countries from controlling the supply.
So just so you know what that means. Okay.
And then they did have purchase dates of them purchasing it from
what year was that? What year was that?
When they were consider buying it, it was in 53 when the program was called MK Ultra. Like it was Artichoke before that and Bluebird before that, but when it adopted the name MK Ultra was in like 53, and that's when.
And how much was it?
They were trying to buy 10 kilograms, which was 100 million doses.
Okay, so in 1953,
they were discussing this in 76.
Okay, so in 1953, there were 155 million people in the United States.
Right.
So it's like to trip everybody, almost everybody. Don't count kids.
Save the kids.
Take the kids out, 75 million, right?
Yeah.
But everybody else gets a dose. You're talking the entire population of adults tripping 15 hours.
Yeah, they could have put it on the whole United States.
It does metabolize different in different people, obviously. That's just any drug. But on average, and this is Healthline, says 6 to 15 hours, which rings true to me. Every time I've ever seen anybody on acid, it's all night.
Yeah.
It's the whole night. And it starts off, so if you've never done acid, there's waves. There's like euphoria. There's laughter. You get like a serotonin rush. Then you start getting like hallucinations. And it's not like a monster comes out of the closet. It's not really that. It's more like distortion of perception.
Color patterns and
exactly
movement
right. So
where there's not movement.
but like it's a big deal.
I heard somebody say the hardest thing in the world to describe is tripping.
Yeah, because you're sick to your stomach, and then you feel great, and then like your heart rate like goes crazy, and then you're chill, and then like it's a lot of that. You have cotton mouth, and then you can't sleep, and then it's just a lot of things to deal with at once. And I was trying to find, before we did this segment, percentage of people that like permanently flip out, and I think it's fairly low, but it does happen.
But there's studies done on LSD where it's like, did you know that there's the cluster, what do they call them? Cluster headaches. They're like migraines.
Yeah.
But so severe that you're writhing on the floor, and they usually the cure is like they try and give them oxygen, get as much oxygen to your brain as you can.
Right.
But LSD, boom, immediately stops it.
So it's weird that you say that, because like that's a big problem with this whole MK Ultra thing, is because there's benefits.
Yeah.
And that's what back to like the whole microdosing thing. That's what like is a big thing now, is that they're dealing with people that are depressed and suicidal, and they're microdosing them, which means they take a little bit of mushrooms and you feel that euphoria, and it sort of changes your mindset. So like
there was a guy in the documentary I saw that he said there's three major things that happen in your life are watching your child born, getting married, and tripping.
I believe that.
He's like, those change your perception of reality, of the world, like of your life. Now,
there's definitely a before and after. Little
sidebar too. There's I don't know if you've ever seen this. It has nothing to do with what we're talking about, except for the tripping part. It's there's a show called The Chef's Table. It's on Netflix, right?
Yeah.
The very first season of that, there's a Brazilian chef, and if you go back to that first season of Chef's Table and watch that opening scene for the chef from Brazil, it's great. Because he describes him taking acid, and he goes, I understood everything.
I said
when I woke up in the morning, I forgot.
I said right before, there's a before and after.
Yeah. That's what made
me think of it. There's an awareness.
Yeah, that's what made me think of it, because he said that. He said, he tells this story about a dream he had, like where he was, and it's really in depth. It's real deep what he shares. And it's like, and he goes, and I had it all figured out. And he goes, when I woke up, I lost it. Yeah. And you can hear that frustration in his voice when he says, I lost it. I knew everything. I was on top of everything. I knew everything, and then I lost it.
So part of me is like, how could they do that? And then the other part of me is like, I totally get it. Like, you know what I mean? Like if you're like a country that all of a sudden, because this is what happened to us. Like you turn the century, we just became a world power.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, we're like number one, right? And then you're like, all right, do we have to kill everybody? Yeah, I mean, and then you're like, okay, that's dumb. Let's think of another way. I understand why they would throw a bunch of money at this and kind of see if there's a easier way.
I feel like sometimes you just get bored and throw money at stuff because it's like,
no, I think this one. I think this one was like it's the shortest distance between A and B. Like you don't have to send an army.
I know when they just recently there was on the floor they were reading off some of the items in the spending bill,
Mm-hmm.
and we like spent like $3 million giving cocaine to beagles.
Yeah.
The dog.
Yeah. I
We
know.
were giving cocaine to beagles.
That's important research.
It's super important, you know. $3 million worth of research.
Is that so they could sniff out cocaine somewhere?
No,
Right. Yeah.
no, it's just to see how they react to cocaine. It had nothing to do with like training them to find it or anything. It was just
They start going to clubs and wearing chains. Getting designer sunglasses.
Who knew beagles were the hip fucking dog?
No, but I mean, I get it. Like, you know, especially after reading that book, the big thing with the CIA at the time, they were like, well, it's not like our typical way of doing it. It's not we're in, you know, you get back to the Bay of Pigs in Cuba.
Yeah.
That was a huge fail.
Yeah.
You know, when you have failed coups, it makes you look like a douchebag on the world stage, right? You're like, what the fuck? You try to take them out? Like, what the fuck's wrong? Like, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But then when you wreck an economy, like they just did it to Venezuela.
Yeah.
They completely wrecked Venezuela.
Well,
and
China was trying to do it to us too. I mean,
absolutely.
They caught them dumping cheap steel, and they do stuff like that if they flood the market with cheap products, and it'll put your local businesses out, you know what I mean? They struggle, and all your products that are getting made with inferior parts. So they're constantly going bad and breaking, so you're looking to other places, and yeah, sure.
They're looking for different ways to control.
Countries are constantly trying to mess with each other's economies.
Absolutely. And you know, the United States, we're the best at it.
We're pretty good.
We're the best at it. We're number one when it comes to messing with people.
Who was it that we turned into a banana republic? Was it Guatemala or where they were always selling bananas to us? At some point, you had to be like, hey, man, we should diversify.
Well, so a lot of people don't know, like, the reason we don't have real sugar in our soda is because, okay, a few things are considered a cartel. So diamonds are considered a cartel. Sugar's one of them. And it's grown mostly in the Caribbean and the equator. We used to make our own sugar in Hawaii. It wasn't cost effective for us to make it. They flexed on us on the price of sugar, and we said, fuck it, we'll make it out of corn.
We'll make corn syrup, bitch.
That's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, you go to like,
why Mexican Coke's better.
That's why Mexican Coke's better, and they have throwback Mountain Dew.
Yeah,
that's like made with real cane sugar. Yeah, it's just different, you know. So, yeah, man. I mean, the United States, they're like, when it comes to control, that's our gig. I don't know how far it stretches in war. So there's not a ton about them giving things to soldiers. However, my dad, and this is first person, was given an experimental drug.
Mm-hmm.
Because he always told us, he never talked about the war. And I know your dad, you said the same thing, right?
Yeah, you only tell the funny stories.
Right, he does. That's my dad. Right, funny stories here and there, or whatever. And but he did tell us some like cryptic things. Like he's like, you know, when I left, 40 hours after I left, I was in hand-to-hand combat, which is crazy. That's like you're fighting with the dude, right? And then he said, when I came back, 48 hours after I left Vietnam, I was just in a firefight, and I was at, this is why I lose it on some people. I was at a big boy restaurant. It's like, so think about that, like, shit, dude, 40 hours before, you're in a firefight, and now you're eating a big boy and having a milkshake, and some onion rings, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he was given this, at the time, was an experimental drug because he had seen so much action. His group of guys, so he was in the 1st Marine Division, and they follow those guys just like they follow like a football team, right? So like you have like the LA Rams, right?
Yeah.
So the LA Rams, they're in St. Louis, and they're in St. Louis for so long. Or, it's better, Cleveland Browns. Cleveland Browns invented in Cleveland, start in Cleveland, and then, 1999 comes along, and Art Modell's like, fuck Cleveland. They're not giving us a stadium. They moved to Baltimore, right?
Like, you can't take our legacy with you. And they were like, beast.
Right. So the
They didn't even take Bill Belichick. That's how fast they wanted to get out of Cleveland.
Isn't that nuts? Right. They go to Baltimore, they win a Super Bowl. Right. So, but the Cleveland Browns are actually the Baltimore Ravens. And then there's like this new Cleveland Browns. All right. It's the same thing for every unit in the military. There's somebody that has kept a record of everywhere where the 1st Marine Division has been, in my dad's case. So they start off in like the Revolutionary War, and it goes all through the history of wars, all the way up to Vietnam, and where they were in every war. And when my dad was in, he was in, and he told us, he actually told us this. He said, I went in and we had a ton of fighting right off the bat. He's like, and then nothing happened for like 7 months. He's like, and then before I got out, we had all this fight. Well, they had actually gone into Vietnam, in the country, and then they had reestablished like where the capital was going to be and where the Marine base was going to be. And they had to get there. And to get there, they had to fight their way there. And then they fought their way there, got there, built this, runway.
Mm-hmm.
And then nothing happened. And then all of a sudden, they have all this fighting, and he's discharged back to the States. And it completely fell in line with everything that, like, his stories that he would tell us, right? So, by chance, the doctor slipped and told us what he was given. We look it up. Here, it wasn't even a drug until like 2 years after he was given it, right? So if they gave him an experimental drug, what else did they give him?
Right.
And I'm not saying they gave him acid. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, like, at the time, they were really looking at like alternative means of therapy.
Right.
And mind control and everything else. So, yeah, like, I mean, most of these things sound really probable.
Well,
it's crazy.
There was a part of MK Ultra was up in Canada too.
Absolutely.
They were doing it to Canadians. There was a guy named Donald Edwin Cameron, and he was conducting experiments for carrying out MK Ultra experiments and didn't realize the whole time he was being funded by the CIA because they were funding him through a front organization called the Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology. So he was doing like the LSD and electrocution, and he was doing all kinds of tests on Canadians at the time, and it was it got released later as part of an internal memo that came from the CIA that disclosed that they were this secret front that was paying him. But yeah, he got like, adjusted for inflation, he got like $500,000 to do these experiments.
I mean, and then you go, then it's like
from like 57 to 64.
So then you got to talk about like Lee Harvey Oswald. So okay, one thing that Woody Harrelson. Everybody, yeah, that guy, he smokes a ton of pot and all that. But he did say he was talking to his dad. So his dad was in jail for killing a federal judge for life. So he got life. And he said one thing his dad told him was that there were a bunch of us there and we didn't know why we were there. Meaning Dallas. So how do you have somebody? He told Woody, I have dealings in the CIA. I'm not in the CIA, but I deal with them all the time. And Woody just kind of thought he was crazy or whatever. And he's like, no, I was in Dallas when Kennedy died, and I had no idea why I was there. That's kind of scary.
Yeah.
So, like, Robert Kennedy Jr., who is maybe running for president, right?
Yeah, he is. He's running on.
Is it official? Is it official?
Yeah, he is, because he went independent.
Okay. So he actually forgave Sirhan, who killed his dad. Because Sirhan said, I had no idea why I was there. I don't know why I did it. He's like, all of a sudden I have a gun in my hand and I shot Bobby Kennedy, and there's no reason for me to do that. Like, he's like, they tried to make it like it was this whole political thing that he disagreed with some policy or whatever. And he's like, no. From the start, he was like, no. I'm not a political person. I don't care. And he killed Bobby Kennedy. And then when they do like the research of it, maybe he didn't actually shoot him. Like, there's a whole lot of other stuff with that. And that's another podcast. But like, wow, if you could like turn somebody to just be like a Manchurian candidate where you can just like have a gun and kill somebody, holy shit, you know?
Right. Not like Naked Gun.
Right. You know they're redoing Naked Gun? It's Liam Neeson and Pamela Anderson.
I don't know.
I don't either, but that's what they say.
There's some things you just don't redo. What do you think they waited until OJ died? Like, if we do it now, he's just gonna beg us for the role.
So this whole idea really isn't crazy, because right now there's something called the Savannah syndrome.
Yeah.
And they're using not drugs, but they're using microwaves and frequencies is what it's always in quotes, and I don't know why, frequencies is in quotes, but it always is. But they're using that to fuck with people in our embassies in certain countries.
Yeah. Wasn't there was one of our embassies had to be evacuated, right? People were getting sick.
Yeah. They're getting like migraines and puking, and their kids are fucked up.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another one, DARPA. I don't know what the acronym means, but whatever. It's a very similar thing. So there's this constant like intelligence battle of how to control Havana syndrome. Yeah. But DARPA has something very similar. It's called remote neurotechnology, and they're manipulating through brainwaves. So, like, yeah, this isn't a matter of whether it happened. It's a matter of like how much of it do you believe?
Yeah.
So. All right, let's get into what we think.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so we've already said like this exists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the programs, it definitely existed. It came out in Congress.
So I guess our only thing is we can't even say it's probable because it did happen.
It happened.
So I guess we have to say like a percentage. I think 100%. I think 100%, if not 99.99. I don't put anything past the government when it comes to something like this. This seems like very applicable in very like different settings. You could do this in 1,000 different ways to gain control of a situation.
And why would branched off into all kinds of directions? So.
Absolutely. That's kind of what I think. I think like all these like stories you hear, they're all true in some regard, you know? It's crazy that our government would do this to our people, but it makes a lot of sense when you see like the boomers now. You know what I mean? when you see them now, you're like, yeah, I get it. I think you and I were like maybe the tail end of that. I don't think that's a thing anymore where people trip on acid. I could be wrong. I think it's mushrooms now. I know there's like a big push on mushrooms. Kind of for the same, this is a bad thing to say, but like kind of for the research that the United States already did. That's why mushrooms are like acceptable now in some states, like Oregon, Washington, and California. They have like therapies that require this dosage. Like the crazy Aaron Rodgers went and took ayahuasca. Like, how is he not like in breach?
Fine.
Yeah, how is he not in breach of contract or like, you know, like
you can say whatever you want to say.
But he's like, yeah, I took ayahuasca, and everybody's like, well, man, he's trying to get better, you know.
Yeah.
He's trying to find the seam, and you can't find the seam unless you take some ayahuasca. I mean, like, it's
now
crazy.
They could do like a thing for like not representing the NFL deal, but if you don't fail a drug test, there's nothing they can do. You can talk all you want.
Well, like, remember Josh Gordon?
You could be like, I killed 10 people, but unless you can prove it, I'm not going to jail.
But do you remember Josh Gordon? He was a receiver for the Browns. He was awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. That guy just got...
Kept getting busted for weed?
For weed, right. Okay, now, weed is like... Because they came out with the CTE thing that said, if you smoke weed, you're less likely to get concussions. Yeah. So they don't test for weed. You know? It's crazy.
Like, you think about, like, who was it? Williams that came out of fucking Florida. He smoked so much weed, and he was like, he had an antisocial behavior. Like, when he did his interviews, he did it with his helmet on.
Oh, Ricky Williams from Texas.
Williams. Yeah, he was high all the time. Like,
he ended up being a pretty good.
And he was one of those dudes that was just like, I'm not gonna keep doing this drug test thing and failing it over weed. And he just like quit playing because he didn't want to keep failing drug tests.
It's crazy, right?
Right, and it was all about weed.
And so I didn't really smoke weed for a long time. And then when I did smoke it, like all the time, I was like, oh shit. Like, it would have totally helped me in so many different...
It's like the Joe Rogan thing.
Yeah, and now I don't smoke weed. And now, like,
Joe Rogan said he didn't start smoking weed until he was in his like late 20s or early 30s or something.
That's how I was mid-20s when I started smoking pot. And like regularly, like I'd smoked it, like I'd be drunk and people like, here, hit this or whatever. And then, but like regularly smoking, I was in my mid-20s and I started smoking like medical, and I'm like, oh, well, that's different, you know? I used to have migraines. I don't get migraines anymore. Like it did change a lot of things. So I think, I don't want to say they meant well. I think the program had some kind of point. I don't think they meant well as far as like caring what happened.
Yeah.
But I think they thought there was a point to it. Like they could figure it out, and, you know. So I'm going to say 100%.
Yeah, not like what I want to say is like 50%, and everything that we were talking about is true. Because we only know about 50% of what they did.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I can see that.
Because you got to understand, it was like MK Ultra, like I was saying, that with the death of Olsen and stuff, it kind of forcing them to bring stuff to light, you know. In 75, it was the Church Committee, it was called, the United States Congress, and a couple other commissions, that the Rockefeller Commission, they investigated the CIA under this stuff, and all this shit came to light that, in fact, MK Ultra did exist. They were conducting illegal experiments on not only United States citizens, but Canadian citizens. Plus, there was activity in bases all around the world where they had what they called expendables. And there's like notes that say like the patient didn't live.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like they did these experiments on them, and they literally like tortured them or brainwashed them to death. So, yeah, I mean, and it all came out. Like, there was even more. There was like the Helms report that came out in 77 under the Freedom of Information Act. And that request was a cache of like 20,000 documents that were all related to MK Ultra.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah, and it led to more Senate hearings. And you got to figure that can't be all of it. You know what I mean?
No.
Tons of stuff would have got destroyed, still got covered up. people that were involved probably went to great lengths to keep their name out of it, so those documents got destroyed. You know what I mean? So them getting hold of what they got a hold of, I bet you it was just the tip of the iceberg.
It's kind of scary that they have that kind of reach.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, man, I mean, but like this to me sounds very us. Like this is what we do.
Yeah.
Like we throw some shit out there and see if maybe it works. If it doesn't, we're like, oops. There we do.
Anybody mad? Here's some money.
Here's some money. All right, so
this piece of paper says you can't sue us.
What do you think? Like, give me a percentage
of how much of these stories are true.
Yeah,
I'm going to say that with definity that 75% of what we talked about is true.
Okay,
because it's documented. They had to admit to it, most of it. So, and then as far as the other stuff's concerned, I don't see why you would be working on this project for so long and not have implemented it anywhere. To think that it was all experimental is absurd, right? So you're saying that they kept running this program for years and years and years and never saw success in any avenue they went down? Because if you see success, then you have something usable and tangible and you use it. You know what
so I mean? A couple years ago, I read something, of course it's online, right? But that the Army, the armed forces, has a drug right now that can keep people awake for weeks at a time and it doesn't affect anything. And I don't believe that, but like if they're like they already did amphetamines, right? And they're like, okay, I see that there's a crash, but if there's no crash, then you're like, okay, well, like what's it do? And you start giving it to people, right? Yeah. But there was a disc jockey, and he was trying to like some kind of publicity stunt, and he stayed up for 7 days, and he went crazy. Like he was drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes, and he just stayed up.
Okay.
There's some kind of publicity stunt. He went crazy on the air.
It's severe health side effects for
big time.
Yeah.
So
mental and physical.
When I heard that, I was like, oh, and it just seems like an extension.
I can't remember what show it was I saw where they were like from the future, where it was like post-apocalyptic future, and they were time traveling back, and the guy discovered cocaine. It's like, he's like, you should really try this cocaine. He's like, was it bad? And he was like, no, it's great. He was like, is there any side effects? None that I can see. And then it was like the next day, he's like completely hard crashed, face down in the fucking. All right, so I mean, we're 75 to 100%. All this happened. Yeah, right. It happened. I mean, like I said, it doesn't make any sense that you'd be in an experimental phase for the entire program.
No. And it's crazy that things like this just kind of like literally, my wife has a friend in town, and I said, hey, man, you guys gotta wrap it up. We got a podcast tonight. And she's like, Stephanie's like, what is it tonight? And I said, MK Ultra. And both of them were like, what's MK Ultra? And I'm like, well, the government gave like acid and barbiturates to people to like try to manipulate. And they're like, no, they didn't. Like, you don't listen to the podcast? I can't believe like
totally different reaction when I told my wife, because when I said, she's like, what are you doing? And I was like, and she was in the kitchen, head down, doing something. And I was like, MK Ultra, and she like looked up slowly, up through the top of her eyes and gave a smile.
Yeah.
She was like, oh yeah. So she was bugging me all night. You doing your research? Did you do your research? Did you look it up? Did you?
And like we just barely scratched the surface. Like
she's
really
gonna be mad as hell at me for.
Yeah, but like there's no way.
How little information I gave on it.
Yeah, but there's no way we can do as much.
Yeah, there's so much.
There's so much. But
I
like
looked it up several times as a topic for this show, and so I've gotten picking up tidbits here and there.
We've done enough field research, you and I, to know the basics.
Yeah.
And
I get what they were doing.
I do too.
The dynamics of it.
I understand. All right. So we're 75 to 100%.
Yeah.
Sure.
It definitely happened. It's just I think it happened more than what we're saying.
Absolutely.
I think it's probably still going on.
I agree.
I think they narrowed it down to something that they locked in as this works, and now they implement that.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
There's no way you don't see any fruits from your labors like that.
No way. I agree.
So.
All right. I think we did it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm Anthony.
We're on the United States government.
We are. We've several times.
And canceled.
And we're done. All right. Well, I'm Anthony.
I'm Brandon.
I'm Mario.
And this is Everything That's Weird. For show notes and merchandise, go to www.everythingthat'sweird.com. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter. And be sure to like, subscribe, and review anywhere that you listen to podcasts. Thank you for listening. See you next time. Thank you for listening to the podcast. If you'd like to contribute, please go to our Patreon page at Everything That's Weird. Check us out on Instagram at Everything That's Weird or Twitter at ETWPod. Or if you'd like to send us an old-fashioned email, go to everythingthat'sweird@gmail.com.